The gunshot that echoed through the mountains that August morning in 1878 changed everything, though Eleanor Adams would not understand why until much later, when she found herself caught between two men who could not have been more different. She had been standing outside the general store in Kingfisher, Oklahoma Territory, her arms full of supplies for the schoolhouse where she taught 23 children their letters and numbers. The territory was still rough around the edges, barely organized, with the railroad bringing new settlers every month and tensions running high between those who had been there since the land run and those who had just arrived. Eleanor had come west from Boston 2 years prior, after her parents passed from typhoid fever within weeks of each other, leaving her alone in a city that suddenly felt too crowded and suffocating. She had answered an advertisement for a teacher in the territories, packed her belongings into a single trunk, and headed west with nothing but hope and determination. The supplies nearly tumbled from her grasp when she heard the shot, and she turned to see a massive figure emerging from the tree line at the edge of town. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun and arms thick with muscle that rippled beneath his buckskin shirt. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He carried a rifle in one hand and a string of rabbits in the other, walking with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in the wilderness. "That is Pierce Sullivan," said Martha Henderson, the postmaster's wife, coming to stand beside Eleanor. "He lives up in the mountains, comes down once a month or so for supplies. Keeps to himself mostly. Been out there alone for near about 5 years now." Eleanor watched as Pierce made his way to the trading post, his boots making little sound despite his size. There was something almost graceful about how he moved, like a mountain cat she had seen once, all coiled strength and awareness. Several people on the street gave him a wide berth, though whether from fear or respect, Eleanor could not tell. "Why does he live alone?" Eleanor asked, curiosity getting the better of her manners. Martha lowered her voice, though Pierce was too far away to hear. "His wife and baby daughter died of fever 6 years back, just before he came out here. Some say he went up into those mountains to die himself, but the mountains brought him back to life instead. He is a good man, from what folks say. Helped the Johnsons when their barn burned down last spring, and he tracked down little Tommy Wilson when the boy got lost hunting. But he does not socialize much, keeps his grief close." Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy. She understood grief, understood the way it could hollow you out and make you want to disappear into someplace vast and empty. She watched Pierce disappear into the trading post, then gathered her supplies more securely, and headed toward the schoolhouse. She did not think much more about Pierce Sullivan that day, occupied as she was with preparing lessons and mending the torn pages of their few precious books. But 3 days later, when Edgar Atwood rode into town on a black stallion, dressed in a fine suit and wearing a gun belt studded with silver, Pierce Sullivan suddenly became very important to her life indeed. Edgar had arrived in Kingfisher 2 months earlier, claiming to be a land speculator from Kansas City. He was handsome in a polished way, with slicked-back blonde hair and a mustache waxed to sharp points. He had money, that much was clear, and he spent it freely at the saloon and the hotel. Within a week of his arrival, he had set his sights on Eleanor. At first, his attention had been flattering. He brought her flowers from the mercantile and walked her home from the schoolhouse, talking about his plans to build a ranch and raise cattle, about how this territory was going to be something great, and how he wanted someone refined and educated by his side when it happened. Eleanor had been cautiously receptive, though something about Edgar made her uncomfortable in ways she could not quite name. He smiled often, but his eyes remained calculating. He spoke of his ambitions constantly, but asked little about her thoughts or feelings. The afternoon Edgar confronted Pierce Sullivan in front of the saloon. Eleanor had been walking back from the schoolhouse with Mary Thompson, one of her older students. They heard the commotion before they saw it, and Eleanor felt her stomach clench with worry. Edgar stood in the middle of the street, his hand resting on his gun, facing Pierce, who had just emerged from the saloon with a small sack of tobacco. A crowd was already gathering, the way crowds always did when violence hung in the air like smoke. "You have been watching Miss Adams," Edgar said, his voice carrying across the street. "I have seen you looking at her when you come to town. I want you to know she is spoken for." Eleanor felt heat rush to her face. She had never agreed to any such thing, had never given Edgar permission to claim her as his. She started forward, but Mary caught her arm. "Miss Adams, you should not get in the middle of this," the girl whispered urgently. Pierce stood utterly still, looking at Edgar with an expression Eleanor could not read from this distance. When he spoke, his voice was low and calm, with a slight roughness from disuse. "I have looked at no one inappropriately. I mind my own business, and I suggest you do the same." "You calling me a liar?" Edgar's hand tightened on his gun. "I am saying there is no quarrel between us," Pierce replied evenly. "I have no interest in fighting you." "Maybe that is because you are yellow," Edgar said, and several people in the crowd gasped. Eleanor broke away from Mary and strode forward, her anger overriding her caution. "Mr. Atwood, that is quite enough. You have no right to speak for me or to challenge anyone on my behalf. I am not your property." Edgar turned to look at her, and for just a moment, she saw something dark flash across his face before his charming smile returned. "Miss Adams, I am simply protecting your honor. A man who lives alone in the mountains, watching a proper lady, well, it raises questions." "The only thing raising questions is your behavior," Eleanor said firmly. Her heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Sullivan has done nothing wrong. This is finished." She turned and walked away, her spine straight, though she could feel the weight of everyone's stares. Behind her, she heard the crowd beginning to disperse, disappointed that there would be no fight to gossip about over dinner. That evening, as Eleanor sat in her small room above the mercantile, correcting arithmetic papers by lamplight, there was a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Pierce Sullivan standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see his eyes were a startling gray-blue like storm clouds over the mountains. "Miss Adams," he said quietly, "I wanted to apologize for this afternoon. I never meant to cause you any trouble." "You did not cause trouble, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Atwood did." Eleanor studied his face, noting the lines of weariness around his eyes, the way he held himself as if expecting her to slam the door in his face. "Would you like to come in?" "It would not be proper, but I suspect at this point the gossips already have plenty to discuss." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That is kind, but no. I just wanted you to know I have never watched you. I mean, I have seen you, of course, when I come to town. You are hard to miss." He paused, and even in the dim light, she could see the faint color rising in his cheeks. "That came out wrong. I meant you stand out because you are different from most folks here. You speak properly and you carry yourself like you come from back east. But I have never stared or followed you or anything that man implied." "I know," Eleanor said softly. "I did not believe him for a moment." Pierce looked at her with something like surprise. "You should probably stay away from me, though. Edgar Atwood is not the type to let an insult go. He will be looking for ways to prove himself now. Then he will be disappointed because I have no intention of encouraging his suit," Eleanor replied. "I appreciate you coming here, Mr. Sullivan. It was very kind of you." He nodded, placed his hat back on his head, and turned to leave. Eleanor watched him go, something stirring in her chest that she had not felt in a long time. The next morning, Eleanor found a small wooden bird on her doorstep, carved with exquisite detail from pine. She picked it up, marveling at the craftsmanship. Every feather was visible, and the tiny eyes seemed almost alive. There was no note, but somehow she knew it had come from Pierce Sullivan. Over the next few weeks, Edgar's pursuit became more aggressive. He showed up at the schoolhouse during lessons, disrupting her teaching until she had to ask him to leave. He sent expensive gifts that she returned unopened. He spread rumors that they were engaged, forcing Eleanor to publicly deny them in front of the town council. The situation was becoming untenable, and Eleanor began to feel trapped. Pierce, meanwhile, stayed away from town. September turned to October, and Eleanor found herself disappointed each time she walked past the trading post and did not see his tall figure inside. She kept the carved bird on her nightstand, running her fingers over its smooth surface before she went to sleep each night. Then, on a crisp October morning, one of her students did not show up for school. 8-year-old Samuel Parker was usually the first to arrive, eager and bright, his slate always carefully cleaned. When his older sister Jenny arrived alone, Eleanor felt immediate concern. "Where is Samuel?" she asked, Jenny's eyes filled with tears. "He ran away last night." Pa was angry with him for letting the chickens out, and Samuel got scared and ran. "We have been looking since dawn but cannot find him. Ma is beside herself." Eleanor dismissed school immediately and went to find the Parkers. The family lived about 3 miles outside of town, and by the time Eleanor arrived, half the town was already there, organizing search parties. Samuel's mother, Rebecca Parker, was nearly hysterical. "He has never been out alone overnight," Rebecca sobbed. "He does not know the land. There are wolves in those hills, and the temperature drops so cold after dark." "We need a tracker," said Sheriff Morton, a grizzled man in his 50s. "Someone who knows these mountains." "Pierce Sullivan," several people said at once. The problem was finding him. His cabin was somewhere up in the mountains, but few people knew exactly where. Some of the men had started riding in that direction when a rider approached from the east, and Eleanor's heart leaped when she recognized Pierce's broad shoulders and dark hair. He must have seen the commotion because he rode straight to the Parker house. "What has happened?" Sheriff Morton quickly explained the situation. Pierce listened intently, his eyes sharp and focused. "How long has the boy been gone?" "Since last night around supper time," Rebecca said, wringing her hands. Pierce nodded. "Which direction did he go?" "We think north toward the creek," said Samuel's father, a thin man who looked hollowed out with worry. "I will find him," Pierce said with such certainty that Eleanor believed him completely. He turned his horse, then paused. "Miss Adams, can you describe the boy to me? I have seen him around town but want to be sure." Eleanor stepped forward. "He is small for his age, with brown hair that curls at his neck. He has a gap between his front teeth and a scar on his left hand from when he fell on the schoolhouse steps. He is wearing a blue shirt and brown trousers, and he is terrified of the dark." Pierce met her eyes and gave a slight nod. "I will bring him home." He rode off at a steady pace, and the crowd watched him disappear into the tree line. Edgar Atwood, who had been standing at the edge of the group, made a dismissive sound. "One man riding off alone. We should form proper search parties, cover more ground." "Pierce Sullivan can track better than 10 men combined," Sheriff Morton said firmly. "If anyone can find that boy, it is him." The waiting was agony. Eleanor stayed with Rebecca Parker, making tea and trying to keep the woman calm. Jenny sat in the corner, clutching her younger brother's worn stuffed rabbit. The house filled and emptied as men came back from their own searches with no news. Evening came, and with it the cold. Eleanor wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stood on the porch, staring out at the mountains. The sun set in brilliant oranges and reds, beautiful and terrible because somewhere out there, a little boy was alone and frightened. "Please," she whispered to the wind, "please let him be all right." As if in answer, a shout went up from one of the men keeping watch on the road. "Rider coming in." Eleanor's breath caught. In the fading light, she could see Pierce approaching, and in front of him on the saddle sat a small figure wrapped in Pierce's buckskin jacket. Rebecca burst from the house with a cry and ran toward them. Pierce dismounted smoothly and lifted Samuel down into his mother's arms. The boy was crying, clinging to Rebecca as she covered his face with kisses. "He was about 5 miles north," Pierce said quietly to the crowd that had gathered. "Fell into a ravine and could not climb out. He has some scratches and bruises, probably twisted his ankle, but he will be fine. Kept his head about him, that boy. Stayed in one place once he realized he was lost, which is the smart thing to do." "How can we ever thank you?" Rebecca sobbed, holding Samuel close. "No thanks needed," Pierce replied. "Just glad he is safe." Eleanor found herself walking toward him without quite deciding to do so. In the twilight, he looked even more imposing, but his eyes were gentle as they met hers. "You kept your word," she said softly. "Always try to," he replied. Edgar pushed his way through the crowd, his face flushed with anger. "Very heroic, Sullivan, though I notice you were conveniently nearby. Makes a man wonder if you knew where the boy was all along." The crowd went silent. Pierce turned slowly to face Edgar, and Eleanor saw his jaw tighten beneath his beard. "That is a serious accusation," Sheriff Morton said sharply. "You better have proof before you start throwing around words like that." "I am just saying it seems convenient," Edgar said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence under the weight of the crowd's disapproval. "You are saying it because you are jealous and small," Eleanor heard herself say. Her voice rang out clear in the evening air. "Mr. Sullivan risked his life today to save a child. He asked for nothing in return and expected no praise. While he was out searching, where were you, Mr. Atwood? Oh, yes, you were standing here, talking about how it should be done without actually doing anything yourself." Edgar's face turned scarlet. "You have no right to speak to me that way." "I have every right," Eleanor shot back. "You have been harassing me for months, ignoring my clear refusals, spreading lies about an engagement that does not exist. I want nothing to do with you, Mr. Atwood. I want you to leave me alone." "You will regret this," Edgar said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are making a mistake choosing a savage mountain man over a gentleman like me." Pierce moved then, not quickly, but with deliberate purpose. He stepped between Eleanor and Edgar, his presence suddenly intimidating despite his calm expression. "She is not choosing anyone," Pierce said quietly. "She is making her own choice to be left in peace. You would do well to respect that." Edgar's hand moved toward his gun and Eleanor's heart stopped. But Sheriff Morton was there suddenly, his own weapon drawn. "Do not even think about it, Atwood," the sheriff said. "You draw that gun and you will spend the night in my jail, maybe longer." For a long moment, Edgar stood there, fury radiating from him. Then he spun on his heel and stalked toward his horse. "This is not over," he called back before riding away. The crowd slowly dispersed, people heading home or stopping to congratulate Pierce again on finding Samuel. Eleanor found herself standing alone with Pierce as full darkness fell and the first stars began to appear. "I am sorry," she said. "I seem to keep causing you trouble." "You have not caused me anything," Pierce replied. "Edgar Atwood is the one causing trouble. He is a man who cannot handle not getting what he wants. Thank you for finding Samuel, and thank you for the carved bird. It is beautiful." Pierce looked surprised. "How did you know it was from me?" Who else would have left it? Eleanor smiled. Do you carve often? It passes the time in the winter. Gets lonely up in the mountains with just the wind for company. He paused, then added, I should probably head back before it gets much darker. Will you come to town again soon? The words came out before Eleanor could stop them, revealing more than she had intended. Pierce studied her face in the starlight. Would you like me to? Yes, Eleanor said simply. I would. Something shifted in his expression, a softness that transformed his rugged features. Then I will. Maybe this Sunday. I could bring fresh venison for the church supper. That would be wonderful, Eleanor said, warmth spreading through her chest. He nodded, started to turn, then looked back. Miss Adams, you were very brave today, standing up to Edgar like that. He is not a man who takes rejection well. I have faced down rooms full of unruly students, Eleanor said with a smile. One petulant man does not frighten me. But after Pierce rode away and Eleanor walked back to her room, she had to admit that Edgar did frighten her a little. She had seen the rage in his eyes, the sense of entitlement. Men like that were dangerous when they felt slighted. The next morning, she found her schoolhouse vandalized. Someone had broken the windows and overturned the desks. Her books were scattered across the floor, and obscene words were scrawled on the chalkboard. Eleanor stood in the doorway, fighting back tears of frustration and anger. I am so sorry, Miss Adams, Sheriff Morton said behind her. He had come as soon as one of the students ran to fetch him. I will find who did this. We both know who did this, Eleanor said quietly. Knowing and proving are two different things, the sheriff replied grimly. But I will be having a serious talk with Mr. Atwood, I can promise you that. The community rallied around Eleanor. By noon, parents and students had helped clean up the mess. Mr. Thompson, the glazier, promised new windows by the next day. Mrs. Henderson donated some of her own books to replace the damaged ones. But the violation of it lingered, the sense that Edgar had reached into her safe space and poisoned it. Eleanor was standing outside the schoolhouse, thanking everyone for their help when Pierce arrived. He took in the scene with a single glance, his expression hardening. Who did this? We do not know for certain, Eleanor said, though her voice made it clear she had her suspicions. Pierce dismounted and walked into the schoolhouse. Eleanor followed and watched as he examined the broken windows, the overturned furniture, the words on the chalkboard. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. This is because of me, he said finally, because you defended me yesterday. This is because of Edgar Atwood's wounded pride and nothing else, Eleanor corrected firmly. You are not responsible for another man's cruelty. Pierce turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes made her breath catch. Everyone I care about gets hurt. My wife, my daughter, and now you are being targeted because I could not keep my distance. Eleanor crossed the space between them and placed her hand on his arm. She felt the tension in his muscles, the barely contained emotion. You brought a lost child home safely yesterday, she said softly. You have never shown me anything but respect and kindness. You carved me a beautiful bird for no reason except perhaps to make me smile. Those are the actions that matter, Pierce, not Edgar's vindictiveness. It was the first time she had used his given name, and she saw him register it. His hand came up to cover hers, rough and warm. I have not cared about anyone in a long time, he said quietly. I built walls around myself up in those mountains, thought I could live out my days alone. But then I would come to town and see you with your students, hear you laugh, watch the way you treated everyone with kindness even when they did not deserve it. You reminded me that there was still goodness in the world. Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. You reminded me of that too. When I came west, I was running from grief and loneliness. I thought if I could just get far enough away, I could escape it. but you cannot escape those things. You have to learn to live with them, to let them change you without letting them destroy you. I think you understand that. I am trying to, Pierce said. Some days are harder than others. I know, Eleanor replied, but you do not have to try alone anymore. If you do not want to be. Pierce looked at her for a long moment, and Eleanor saw the war playing out behind his eyes, the fear of loss battling with the longing for connection. Finally, slowly, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. I would like that very much, he said. They might have stood there longer, but Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat loudly from the doorway and they stepped apart. The older woman was trying not to smile. Sorry to interrupt, but Sheriff Morton is looking for you, Mr. Sullivan. Says he has some questions about last night. Pierce nodded and released Eleanor's hand reluctantly. I will be back, he promised her quietly before leaving. The sheriff's questions were routine, just establishing that Pierce had been alone at his cabin when the vandalism occurred. But the interview gave Edgar exactly what he wanted, a chance to spread more rumors about the mountain man being investigated for destruction of property. By the time Sunday came, the town was buzzing with gossip about Eleanor and Pierce. Some people were scandalized that a proper schoolteacher would associate with a recluse who lived in the mountains. Others were romantic about it, talking about how he had carved her a bird and saved Samuel Parker. Eleanor tried to ignore all of it and focus on her students and her work. Pierce arrived at the church just before the service started, carrying a haunch of venison that he donated to the supper. He had clearly made an effort, his beard trimmed neatly and his hair tied back. He wore clean clothes and had polished his boots. Eleanor felt her heart skip when she saw him standing awkwardly at the edge of the congregation, clearly uncomfortable with all the attention. She walked over to him, ignoring the whispers that followed her movement. Good morning, Mr. Sullivan. Good morning, Miss Adams, he replied, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. You look very nice. Eleanor was wearing her best dress, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes. She had taken extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was more elaborate than her usual practical bun. Thank you. Shall we sit together? She saw surprise flicker across his face, then gratitude. I would like that. They sat near the back, where Pierce looked less likely to bolt. Reverend Thomas preached about kindness and forgiveness, and Eleanor could not help but think how timely the message was. After the service, people mingled outside while the women set up tables for the supper. Edgar arrived late, dressed impeccably as always, with several men Eleanor recognized as ranch hands he had hired. They were rough-looking characters, and the way they flanked Edgar made it clear they were more than just employees. Edgar's eyes found Eleanor immediately, and she saw the cold anger there. Miss Adams, he said, approaching with false politeness. How lovely to see you. I heard about the unfortunate incident at the schoolhouse. Terrible thing. Yes, it was, Eleanor replied coolly. Edgar's gaze shifted to Pierce, who had positioned himself slightly in front of Eleanor, his body language protective without being aggressive. Sullivan, did not expect to see you at church. Never struck me as the religious type. I have my own relationship with God, Pierce said evenly. Do not need to advertise it. Of course, Edgar said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. I have been thinking about our last conversation, you know, about how you were not interested in fighting me. I think that was wise of you. A man who lives alone in the mountains, who knows what kind of coward he might be. Eleanor felt Pierce tense beside her, but he kept his voice level. I have no interest in proving anything to you, Atwood. That is what a coward would say, Edgar pressed. Unless you are willing to back up your claims, I challenge you, Sullivan. A fair fight, right here, right now. Winner gets to court Miss Adams properly. The crowd that had been pretending not to listen suddenly went silent. Eleanor felt rage surge through her. "I am not a prize to be won," she said sharply. "And I have already made my feelings clear to you, Mr. Atwood. This is absurd." "Let the man speak for himself," Edgar said. "Unless he is too afraid." Pierce looked at Edgar for a long moment, and Eleanor could see him weighing his options. She knew he could probably take Edgar in a fight. Pierce was larger, stronger, and likely far more experienced in real violence, as opposed to the dueling games men like Edgar played. But she also knew that fighting would solve nothing. It would just give Edgar what he wanted, a chance to play the victim or the hero depending on how things went. "No," Pierce said finally. Edgar's smile widened. "No, you are refusing to defend the lady's honor." "I am refusing to participate in your childish game," Pierce replied calmly. "Miss Adams does not need me to fight for her. She has made her own choices clear. If you cannot accept that, the problem is with you, not with me or her." "You are yellow," Edgar spat. "A coward hiding behind a woman's skirts. Call me whatever names make you feel better," Pierce said. "I have been called worse by better men. It does not change anything. I am not fighting you." Eleanor felt a surge of admiration for Pierce so strong it almost took her breath away. He was standing there, being insulted in front of the whole town, and he was choosing peace over violence. Not because he was afraid, but because he was strong enough to walk away. Edgar's face flushed red. "If you will not fight me like a man, then I will make you. You have been trespassing on my land, Sullivan. I own the mineral rights to the northern section, and I have seen your tracks there." "I have been on public land only," Pierce said. "I know where the boundaries are." "Your word against mine," Edgar said. "And I think the law will side with a businessman over a mountain hermit." Sheriff Morton, the sheriff, had been watching the whole exchange with a troubled expression. "Now, Edgar, let us not do anything rash." "I am well within my rights," Edgar insisted. "He has been trespassing, and I want him arrested, unless he wants to settle this like a gentleman." Pierce's jaw tightened, and Eleanor could see the frustration building in him. He was being cornered, forced into a situation where any choice he made would have consequences. "This is ridiculous," Reverend Thomas said, stepping forward. "We are at a church supper, not a saloon. This kind of behavior is unseemly." "I agree," said a new voice, and everyone turned to see Samuel Parker's father stepping forward. "Seems to me Mr. Sullivan is showing more Christian values than anyone else here. He could probably beat Edgar Atwood 6 ways from Sunday, but he is choosing peace instead. That takes more courage than throwing punches." Several other men murmured agreement, and Eleanor saw Edgar's confidence waver slightly. He had expected the crowd to turn against Pierce, to see his refusal to fight as cowardice. Instead, people were starting to see through Edgar's manipulation. "Fine," Edgar said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You can hide behind your righteousness for now, Sullivan, but this is not over, not by a long shot." He turned to his men. "We are leaving." They mounted their horses and rode off, kicking up dust. The crowd slowly began to disperse, conversation starting up again, though the mood of the afternoon was ruined. Eleanor turned to Pierce. "Are you all right?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, though I think you were right to worry about him. He's going to keep pushing until something breaks." "Then we will deal with it together," Eleanor said firmly. "You did the right thing, Pierce. Walking away from that fight took more strength than giving in to his taunts would have." "I hope you are right," Pierce said quietly, "because part of me wanted very much to teach him a lesson." "I know," Eleanor said, reaching for his hand. "But you showed him something more important. You showed him that you cannot be controlled by his provocations. That is what is really eating at him. He cannot manipulate you the way he manipulates others." The church supper continued, though the joy had gone out of it. Pierce stayed close to Eleanor, and she found herself grateful for his solid presence. They sat together, talking quietly about small things, learning about each other. She told him about Boston, about teaching, about the students she adored. He told her about the mountains, about the wildlife, about the peace he found in the solitude. "You ever get lonely?" Eleanor asked. "Every day," Pierce admitted, "but I thought that was what I deserved. After my wife and daughter died, I could not stand to be around people. Everyone wanted to talk about them, to offer sympathy, and I just wanted silence. So I came out here and found it. But silence can be its own kind of torture after a while." "I am glad you came down from your mountain," Eleanor said softly. "So am I," Pierce replied, his eyes holding hers. As evening fell, Pierce insisted on walking Eleanor back to her room. They moved slowly through the darkening streets, neither of them wanting the day to end. "Can I see you again?" Pierce asked as they reached her door. "Properly, I mean, maybe you could come up to my cabin. I could show you the mountains. They are beautiful this time of year." "I would love that," Eleanor said. "Perhaps next Saturday. I do not have school." "Saturday it is," Pierce agreed. He hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her cheek, his beard soft against her skin. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Pierce," she whispered. She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the shadows, and hugged the warmth of that brief kiss to herself. The week passed slowly. Eleanor taught her classes, corrected papers, and found herself constantly looking out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of Pierce. Edgar did not show his face in town, which should have been a relief but instead felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. On Friday evening, Sheriff Morton came to see Eleanor. His face was grim. "I need to talk to you about Edgar Atwood," he said. "I have been asking around, sending some telegrams. Turns out his story about being a land speculator from Kansas City was a lie. He was run out of Dodge City for cheating at cards and threatening a woman who refused his advances. Before that, he was in Abilene, where similar complaints were filed. He is a con man and possibly worse." Eleanor felt ice run through her veins. "What does this mean?" "It means he is dangerous and unpredictable," the sheriff said. "I am going to talk to him tomorrow, tell him he needs to move on from Kingfisher. But I wanted to warn you first. Stay aware of your surroundings. Do not go anywhere alone if you can help it." "I am supposed to go to Pierce's cabin tomorrow," Eleanor said. "That might actually be the safest place for you," the sheriff replied. "But be careful on the way there. Want me to have someone escort you?" "No, Pierce is meeting me at the edge of town at dawn," Eleanor said. "I will be fine." But that night, she barely slept, tossing and turning with worry. When dawn finally came, she dressed quickly and packed a small bag with some food and a shawl. Pierce was waiting where he said he would be, sitting astride a beautiful gray horse and leading a smaller chestnut mare. "That is Cinnamon," he said with a smile. "She is gentle as a lamb. Thought she would be good for you." Eleanor had ridden before, though not in several years. Pierce helped her mount, his hands strong and steady on her waist. The touch sent warmth through her despite the morning chill. They rode out of town as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and earth. Eleanor felt herself relaxing as they climbed higher into the mountains, following a trail that Pierce clearly knew by heart. "How far is your cabin?" she asked. "About 2 hours from here," Pierce replied. "Far enough that most people will not make the trip, close enough that I can get to town when I need supplies." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the horses' hooves on the rocky trail and the morning songs of birds. Eleanor had forgotten how peaceful the wilderness could be, how it seemed to put human concerns into perspective. Pierce's cabin was beautiful. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a creek running nearby. The structure was solid and well-built, larger than Eleanor had expected, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. "You built this yourself?" she asked in amazement. "Had some help with the logs," Pierce admitted. "But yes, mostly myself. Gave me something to focus on that first year. Kept me from going completely mad with grief." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. There was a large main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, a loft for sleeping, and even a small room that Pierce used for his wood carving. Everything was neat and well maintained, from the handmade furniture to the colorful quilt on the bed. "Pierce, this is wonderful," Eleanor said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. He looked pleased by her reaction. "It is not much, but it is home. Can I make you some coffee?" "I have to admit, I do not entertain often, so my hosting skills might be rusty." Eleanor laughed. "Coffee would be lovely." They spent the morning talking, sharing more of their stories. Eleanor learned that Pierce had been a soldier in the war, that he had seen things that still haunted him. His wife, Sarah, had been his childhood sweetheart. Their daughter, Mary, had been 3 years old when the fever took them both. "I failed them," Pierce said quietly, staring into his coffee cup. "I was away, helping a neighbor with a barn raising. By the time I got home, they were both burning up. The doctor did what he could, but it was not enough. Sarah died first, then Mary 2 days later. I buried them on a hill overlooking our farm, and then I sold everything and came west. Thought maybe I could outrun the guilt." "It was not your fault," Eleanor said gently. "Fever is not something you can prevent or control. You did not fail them, Pierce. Life just broke your heart." "I know that in my head," Pierce replied, "but my heart has taken longer to believe it." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "Tell me about them." "Not about how they died, but about how they lived." "What made Sarah laugh? What did Mary like to play?" Pierce's eyes filled with tears, but he smiled. "Sarah had this laugh that could light up a whole room. It started quiet and then just bubbled out of her like she could not contain it. And Mary, she loved birds. Used to sit for hours watching them, making up stories about where they were going." They talked through the afternoon, and Eleanor saw the weight lifting from Pierce's shoulders as he spoke about his lost family. She shared her own grief about her parents, about the loneliness that had driven her west. "We are quite a pair," Pierce said finally. "Two people running from grief and somehow finding each other in the middle of Oklahoma territory." "Maybe we are not running anymore," Eleanor suggested. "Maybe we are just finding our way forward." Pierce stood and held out his hand. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her outside and up a trail that climbed steeply through the trees. Eleanor's legs burned from the exertion, but Pierce kept a steady pace, occasionally pointing out animal tracks or interesting plants. Finally, they emerged onto a rocky outcrop that looked out over miles of forest and sky. "This is where I come when everything feels like too much," Pierce said. "Looking at all this, it reminds me that I am just one small part of something much bigger. My pain matters, but it does not define everything." Eleanor stood beside him, awed by the view. "It is breathtaking." "Eleanor," Pierce said, turning to face her, "I need to tell you something." I never expected to care about anyone again. I had convinced myself that part of my life was over, that I would just live out my days alone up here. But then you came into my life, and everything changed. You make me want to be part of the world again. You make me want to have a future." Eleanor's heart was pounding. "Pierce, I feel the same way. When I am with you, I feel seen in a way I have not felt in years. You do not just look at what I do or how I present myself. You see who I actually am." Pierce reached up and gently cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," Eleanor breathed. He leaned down and his lips met hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. The kiss was soft at first, questioning, but when Eleanor responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, it deepened. Pierce's arms came around her waist, pulling her close against his solid frame, and Eleanor felt like she was finally home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Eleanor Adams." "I am falling in love with you too, Pierce Sullivan," she whispered back. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, looking out at the mountains. Eleanor felt a peace she had not known was possible, a sense that despite everything they had both lost, they had found something precious together. The ride back to town that evening was reluctant. Neither of them wanted the day to end. Pierce held Eleanor's hand as their horses walked side by side down the mountain trail. "When can I see you again?" he asked. "Tomorrow?" Eleanor suggested with a smile. Pierce laughed, the sound rich and wonderful. "I will be there." But as they approached Kingfisher, they both noticed something wrong. There was too much activity for a Saturday night. People gathered in the streets, horses tied up everywhere. Sheriff Morton was on his porch, and he hurried down when he saw them. "Thank God you are all right," he said to Eleanor. "Edgar Atwood has been looking for you all day. He is drunk and ranting about how you humiliated him, how he is going to make you pay. I have had men out searching for you. Where have you been?" "She was with me," Pierce said, his voice taking on a hard edge. "Safe. Where is Atwood now? We do not know. He and his men left town around noon, but he said he would be back, said he had some business to settle." The sheriff looked at Pierce. "I think he is coming for you, Sullivan. He has been telling anyone who will listen that you are a coward and a thief, that you have been turning people against him." "None of that is true," Eleanor protested. "I know that, and so does most of the town," the sheriff said. "But Edgar is past caring about truth. He just wants blood now." "I need to get Eleanor somewhere safe," Pierce said. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I am not hiding. This has gone on long enough." "Eleanor, please," Pierce said, fear clear in his eyes. "He is dangerous." "Which is exactly why we need to end this," Eleanor replied. "I will not spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, and neither should you." Before Pierce could argue further, there was a shout from the end of the street. Edgar Atwood rode in with his 3 hired guns, all of them armed. Edgar swayed slightly in his saddle, clearly still drunk. "There you are," Edgar called out, his words slurring together. "The mountain man and his lady, been looking for you two all day." Pierce stepped in front of Eleanor. "Go into the sheriff's office," he said quietly. "I am not leaving you," she replied. "Sullivan," Edgar shouted. "Time to settle this like men. No more running, no more hiding behind women and excuses. You and me right now." People were pouring out of buildings to watch. Sheriff Morton stepped forward, his hand on his gun. "Edgar, you are drunk. Go sleep it off. We can talk about this tomorrow." "No more talking," Edgar said. He dismounted clumsily and faced Pierce. "Draw your weapon, Sullivan." "I do not want to fight you," Pierce said, his voice calm and steady. "Of course you do not, you coward," Edgar spat. "You have been hiding behind that peace and kindness act, but I see through you. You are just yellow, afraid of a real man." "If that is what you need to believe," Pierce said evenly. Edgar's face twisted with rage. "Fine. If you will not draw, then I will just shoot you where you stand. At least then everyone will see you for what you really are." His hand went to his gun, and everything happened very fast. Sheriff Morton shouted. Eleanor screamed, but Pierce did not move for his weapon. Instead, he just stood there, his hands at his sides, looking at Edgar with something like pity. Edgar drew his gun and aimed it at Pierce's chest. The entire street held its breath. "Do it then," Pierce said quietly. "Shoot an unarmed man in front of all these witnesses. Show everyone here who you really are." Edgar's hand trembled, sweat beaded on his forehead, Around them, people watched in horrified fascination. The moment stretched out, taut as a bowstring. "Shoot me," Pierce repeated. "Or put the gun away and leave. Those are your choices, Atwood. I will not fight you. I will not give you the violence you want. You can kill me if that is what you need to do, but you will have to live with it for the rest of your life. And everyone here will know you for a murderer." Eleanor could see the war playing out on Edgar's face. He wanted to pull the trigger, wanted to prove his dominance. But with every second that passed, he looked weaker, more pathetic. A man threatening an unarmed opponent was not strong. He was the opposite. "This is insane," one of Edgar's hired guns said suddenly. "I signed on for ranch work, not murder. I am out." He turned his horse and rode away. The other two exchanged glances and followed him, leaving Edgar alone in the street. "Fine," Edgar finally screamed, lowering his gun. "Fine, you can have her, Sullivan. You can have this whole pathetic town. I am done with all of you." He holstered his weapon and mounted his horse. "You are all fools," he said bitterly. "That mountain man is playing you. He is not kind or peaceful. He is just too scared to be anything else. And you," he looked at Eleanor with such venom that she flinched, "you will regret choosing him. When you are living in that dirty cabin, miles from civilization, you will remember you could have had comfort and security with me." "I would rather have love and respect than all the comfort in the world," Eleanor replied clearly. "And I have found both with Pierce." Edgar made a disgusted sound and rode out of town. Sheriff Morton immediately sent 2 deputies to follow him and make sure he actually left the territory. The crowd slowly dispersed, people talking excitedly about what had just happened. Eleanor found herself surrounded by women from the town, all of them talking at once, asking if she was all right, praising Pierce's courage. Pierce himself stood very still, his face pale. Eleanor pushed through the crowd to reach him. "Are you all right?" she asked, taking his hands. They were shaking slightly. "I thought he was going to shoot," Pierce said quietly. "I really thought he might. But he did not," Eleanor said. "You called his bluff, and you won without raising a fist or drawing a weapon. You showed everyone here what true strength looks like." Pierce pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I was so afraid he was going to hurt you. That is the only reason I stood there. If he had aimed at you instead of me, I do not know if I could have been so calm." "But he did not," Eleanor repeated. "It is over, Pierce. He is gone." Sheriff Morton confirmed it the next day. Edgar Atwood had left Oklahoma Territory and was last seen heading toward Texas. The sheriff had sent warnings ahead to other towns about his behavior, making it unlikely Edgar would be able to set up his con operations anywhere nearby. Life in Kingfisher slowly returned to normal, but Eleanor and Pierce's relationship became the center of town gossip, this time in a positive way. Pierce started coming to town more often, sometimes staying over at the boarding house. Eleanor began spending weekends at his cabin with Mrs. Henderson acting as chaperone to preserve propriety. As autumn deepened into winter, their love grew stronger. Pierce taught Eleanor how to track animals in the snow, how to read the signs of changing weather in the clouds. Eleanor introduced Pierce to literature, reading to him in the evenings by firelight, watching his face as he lost himself in stories of far-off places. "Marry me," Pierce said one evening in December. They were sitting in his cabin, snow falling softly outside, a fire crackling in the hearth. "I know I am not much of a catch. I am just a mountain man with a rough cabin and a lot of grief in my past. But I love you, Eleanor. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Marry me and make this cabin a home again." Eleanor set down the book she had been reading and looked at him with shining eyes. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Pierce pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring he had made himself, silver twisted into delicate leaves with a small diamond at the center. "It was my mother's diamond," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "The only thing I kept from my old life. I set it in new silver because I wanted it to represent our new beginning." Eleanor looked at the ring, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect. You are perfect. And yes, you have grief in your past, but so do I. We will carry it together, and maybe that will make it lighter." They were married on a bright January morning in 1879 in the small church in Kingfisher. Half the town attended, cramming into the pews to see their shy mountain man and their dedicated schoolteacher pledge their lives to each other. Samuel Parker was the ring bearer, still talking excitedly about how Mr. Sullivan had saved him. Jenny Parker scattered flower petals that she had pressed the previous summer. Pierce stood at the altar in a new suit that Eleanor had helped him pick out, his hair neatly trimmed, his beard groomed. But it was his eyes that made Eleanor catch her breath as she walked down the aisle toward him. They shone with such love and joy that she knew, without any doubt, that she was making the right choice. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Thomas began, and Eleanor felt like her heart might burst from happiness. After the ceremony, there was a reception at the community hall. People brought food and gifts, and there was even a fiddler who played music for dancing. Eleanor danced with Pierce, his arms strong around her, and felt like she was floating. "I never thought I would be this happy again," Pierce whispered in her ear. "You brought me back to life, Eleanor." "You did the same for me," she replied. They spent their wedding night at Pierce's cabin, which Eleanor now thought of as their cabin. Pierce had spent weeks preparing it, adding little touches he thought she would like. There were new curtains on the windows, a braided rug by the bed, and shelves for her books. In the corner sat a beautiful rocking chair he had made, carved with intricate patterns of birds and flowers. "For when we have children," he said, his cheeks coloring slightly. "If you want them, that is." "I want everything with you," Eleanor said, going into his arms. "A life, a home, a family, all of it." Their first year of marriage was blissful despite the challenges. Eleanor continued teaching, riding down to Kingfisher 3 days a week while Pierce managed their homestead. He hunted and trapped, sold pelts and meat in town, and slowly built up a small herd of cattle. In the evenings, they worked together on the cabin, making improvements and expansions. Pierce was patient and gentle with Eleanor, teaching her the skills she needed to thrive in the mountains. She learned to shoot, to preserve food, to read the weather and the forest. In turn, she continued his education, teaching him to read better, helping him with figures and accounts. But the greatest joy came in the fall of 1879, when Eleanor discovered she was expecting a child. Pierce was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked, old fears resurfacing. "What if I lose you like I lost Sarah?" "You will not lose me," Eleanor said firmly. "We are going to be careful and smart, and this time will be different, Pierce, I promise." She arranged to stay in town with Mrs. Henderson for the last month of her pregnancy, close to the doctor. Pierce came down from the mountain and stayed at the boarding house, driving everyone crazy with his worry. When Eleanor's labor began on a warm June evening in 1880, he paced outside the room, praying harder than he had ever prayed in his life. "Mr. Sullivan," the doctor finally called, "you have a healthy baby boy." Pierce burst into the room and found Eleanor propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. His son had a shock of dark hair and was waving his little fists in the air. "Hello, my love," Eleanor said softly. "Come meet your son." Pierce approached carefully as if the baby might break. Eleanor placed the infant in his arms, and Pierce looked down at his son with wonder. "He is perfect," Pierce whispered. "We are naming him Thomas," Eleanor said, "after your father, Pierce's eyes filled with tears. Thomas Sullivan. I like that. Watching Pierce with their son healed something in both of them. Pierce had been so afraid that having another child would betray the memory of his lost daughter, but he quickly realized that love did not work that way. His heart was big enough for all of them, and little Thomas was his own person, not a replacement for anyone. They took Thomas home to the mountains when he was a month old. The cabin that had once been a place of solitude and grief was now filled with baby cries and laughter. Pierce proved to be a devoted father, getting up for night feedings, singing lullabies in his deep voice, carrying Thomas in a sling while he worked. Eleanor eventually reduced her teaching to just 2 days a week, not wanting to miss too much of Thomas's infancy. The school board understood and found another teacher to help cover her schedule. As Thomas grew, the cabin grew too. Pierce added a room for the baby, then another room for storage, then a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings. Their herd of cattle expanded. Pierce taught tracking skills to young men from town, earning extra money. Eleanor started a small school at the cabin for children who lived too far from town to attend regularly. 2 years after Thomas was born, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had Eleanor's green eyes and Pierce's dark hair, and she was as gentle as her name suggested. Pierce was completely smitten, carrying his daughter everywhere, telling her stories, making her tiny wooden toys. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Pierce and Eleanor built a life together that honored their pasts while embracing their future. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Rose was quieter, more studious, reminding Pierce of Eleanor with her love of books and learning. In 1885, they had their third child, another son they named Samuel, after the boy Pierce had saved all those years ago. Samuel Parker, now a young man, was honored to have the baby named after him and became something of a big brother to all the Sullivan children. The mountain that had once been Pierce's refuge from pain became a place of joy. The cabin rang with children's laughter, with Eleanor's singing as she worked, with Pierce's deep voice reading stories in the evenings. They had chickens and a milk cow, a vegetable garden that Eleanor tended, and fruit trees that Pierce planted. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Pierce and Eleanor climbed up to the rocky outcrop where he had first told her he was falling in love with her. The children were with Mrs. Henderson in town for the night, giving them a rare moment alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Pierce asked, pulling Eleanor close against the evening chill. "Marrying a mountain man and living up here instead of in town where things are easier?" "Never," Eleanor said immediately. "This life we have built, it is everything I ever wanted. You are everything I ever wanted." "I was so broken when you met me," Pierce said softly. "I never thought I could be whole again. But you put me back together piece by piece with your patience and your love. You saved me, Eleanor." "We saved each other," Eleanor corrected. "I was just as lost as you were, just in a different way. We found each other exactly when we needed to." Pierce kissed her, a kiss full of 10 years of love and commitment and partnership. "Here is to another 50 years, he said. "At least," Eleanor agreed. They watched the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Below them, smoke rose from the chimney of their cabin, a beacon of home and warmth. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the scent of the forest they both loved. Pierce thought about the man he had been when he first came to these mountains, hollow and hopeless, wanting only to escape his pain. He thought about Eleanor arriving in Kingfisher, trying to outrun her grief. And he thought about how life had brought them together, two broken people who made each other whole. He thought about Edgar Atwood too, occasionally. They had heard through the sheriff that Edgar had continued his pattern in Texas and New Mexico, until he finally ran into someone who did not tolerate his threats. Last they heard, he was serving time in a territorial prison. Pierce felt sorry for him in a way. Edgar had been given a chance to choose a different path that day in Kingfisher, and he had eventually chosen violence anyway. It had been his downfall. Pierce, on the other hand, had chosen kindness. He had walked away from Edgar's challenges, refused to fight, and shown strength through peace. And he had won everything that mattered. He had won Eleanor's heart, not through dominance or violence, but through gentleness and respect. He had built a family and a life that filled him with joy every single day. "What are you thinking about?" Eleanor asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "How lucky I am," Pierce replied. "How blessed." "Me too," Eleanor said. They stayed on the outcrop until the stars came out, holding each other, talking about their children and their dreams and their life together. Finally, as the temperature dropped, they made their way back down the trail to their cabin. Inside, Pierce built up the fire while Eleanor made tea. They sat together on the couch he had built, Eleanor's feet in Pierce's lap as he rubbed them gently. The cabin was quiet without the children, but the silence was peaceful rather than lonely. "I love our life," Eleanor said contentedly. "Every single part of it. Even the hard parts?" Pierce asked. "Especially the hard parts," Eleanor replied. "Because they taught us how strong we are, how much we can overcome together." Pierce thought about all they had survived, the grief they each carried, the challenge from Edgar, the fear and uncertainty, the difficulties of frontier life, the harsh winters, the lean times. They had faced all of it together, and it had only made them stronger. "You know what I realized," Pierce said. "When Edgar challenged me, he thought refusing to fight made me weak, but it was actually the hardest thing I have ever done. Every instinct I had told me to fight, to defend you, to prove myself. But I knew that violence would not solve anything. It would just perpetuate the cycle. So I chose peace, even though it was terrifying." "That is why I love you," Eleanor said. "You are strong enough to be gentle, brave enough to be kind. In a world that tells men they have to be hard and aggressive, you chose a different path. And you showed everyone watching that real strength is not about how well you can fight. It is about how well you can love." Pierce felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I hope I am teaching Thomas and Samuel that. I want them to know they can be strong and gentle, brave and kind, that those things are not contradictory." "You are," Eleanor assured him. "Every day you show them what a good man looks like." And Rose, she's going to grow up knowing that she deserves to be treated with respect and kindness, because that is how she sees her father treat her mother. They talked into the night, as they often did, sharing their thoughts and dreams and memories. Eventually, they climbed up to their loft bedroom, where the quilts Eleanor had sewn covered their bed, and the wooden birds Pierce had carved lined the windowsill. As Pierce pulled his wife close and felt her settle against him with a contented sigh, he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. He was grateful for Eleanor, for his children, for this life. He was grateful for the mountains that had sheltered him in his grief and witnessed his healing. He was grateful for second chances and new beginnings. Most of all, he was grateful that he had chosen kindness over violence, peace over aggression, love over pride. That choice had given him everything that mattered. The years continued to unfold in their beautiful, ordinary way. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, choosing to stay in the mountains and start his own homestead nearby. Rose became a teacher like her mother, eventually running the school in Kingfisher. Samuel, the youngest, developed a gift for working with animals and became a sought-after horse trainer. Pierce and Eleanor grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Their hair went gray, their bodies slowed down, but their devotion to each other never wavered. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their cabin the gathering place for a large and loving family. In the summer of 1915, as Pierce approached his 70th birthday, he and Eleanor took one final climb up to their special outcrop. It took them much longer than it used to, with frequent rests, but they made it to the top. 36 years, Eleanor said, sitting beside Pierce on the warm rock. 36 years since you told me you were falling in love with me right here. Best decision I ever made, Pierce said, taking her hand. His fingers were gnarled with arthritis now, but his grip was still strong. Mine too, Eleanor replied. They looked out at the view they had seen hundreds of times but never tired of. The mountains stretched endlessly, covered in green forest, crowned with blue sky. Birds wheeled overhead. The wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. We built something good, did we not? Pierce asked. We built something wonderful, Eleanor confirmed. A life full of love and family and purpose. We healed each other. We raised good children who are raising good children. We showed people that strength and gentleness can coexist. I could not have asked for more. Pierce thought about the broken man he had been, living alone in these mountains, convinced his life was over. He thought about how Eleanor had changed everything, bringing light back into his world. He thought about the choice he had made not to fight Edgar, the choice that had seemed so hard at the time but had been absolutely right. Violence would have solved nothing. It might have even cost him Eleanor's love or his life, or both. But choosing peace, choosing kindness had won him everything. I love you, he said to Eleanor, the same words he had spoken thousands of times over their decades together, and yet they never lost their meaning. I love you too, Eleanor replied, leaning against him. They sat together on the mountain as the sun began to set. Two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built a life more beautiful than either had dared to dream. The Wild West had been hard and often cruel, but it had also given them space to heal, to grow, to become the people they were meant to be. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, Pierce and Eleanor made their slow way back down to their cabin, where their family waited. Their children had come for a visit, along with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and the cabin was bursting with noise and laughter and love. Pierce stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his family, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had led him here. From grief to healing, from loneliness to love, from brokenness to wholeness, Eleanor came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, though she probably already knew. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Pierce said. "That choosing you was the easiest decision I ever made, and choosing kindness over violence was the hardest. But both choices led me here, to this moment, surrounded by the family we created and the love we built together." "No regrets?" Eleanor asked with a smile. "Not a single one," Pierce replied, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. "Not one." They joined their family inside, and the cabin filled with warmth and joy. Children played at their feet while adults shared stories and laughter. Food was passed around, babies were cuddled, songs were sung. As Pierce looked around at the legacy he and Eleanor had created, he knew with absolute certainty that he had chosen right all those years ago. Kindness had won Eleanor's heart. Peace had built their life. Love had sustained them through everything. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Not who could fight the hardest or shoot the fastest or dominate the most, but who could love the deepest, forgive the most completely, and build something lasting and true. Pierce Sullivan, the mountain man who had chosen kindness over violence, had won everything that really counted. He had one love, family, and a life well lived. He had one peace, joy, and purpose. He had won it all by refusing to fight, by choosing instead to love. And that victory was sweeter and more lasting than anyone through violence could ever be. As the evening wore on and eventually, the family prepared to head home to their own cabins and houses. There were hugs and kisses all around. Thomas clasped his father's shoulder, Rose kissed both her parents' cheeks, and Samuel promised to visit again soon. Finally, Pierce and Eleanor were alone again in their cabin. They prepared for bed in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of partnership. As they settled under their quilts, Eleanor nestled into Pierce's side the way she had done thousands of times before. "You remember the first night I stayed here?" she asked softly. "How nervous we both were," Pierce chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I remember being terrified I would do something wrong and scare you away. And I remember thinking I had never felt safer in my life," Eleanor replied. "You have always made me feel protected but never controlled, loved but never possessed. That is a rare gift, Pierce Sullivan." "You brought out the best in me," Pierce said. "Made me want to be the man you saw when you looked at me, the man who chose peace over violence, love over pride." "You already were that man," Eleanor said. "You just needed someone to remind you." They talked quietly until Eleanor's breathing deepened and Pierce knew she had fallen asleep. He lay awake a while longer, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin settling, the wind in the pines outside, the creek running in the distance. He thought about the long journey of his life, the joy of his first family, the devastating grief of losing them, the years of isolation in these mountains. The day Eleanor Adams walked into his life and everything changed. The confrontation with Edgar Atwood and the choice he had made to walk away rather than fight. The building of a new family, a new life, a new purpose. It had not always been easy. There had been hard winters and lean times. There had been moments of doubt and fear. There had been old griefs that resurfaced without warning, wounds that never fully healed but learned to coexist with joy. But through it all there had been love. Eleanor's love, constant and sure. His children's love, bright and energizing. The love of the land, the mountains, the simple pleasures of a life lived close to nature and family. Pierce closed his eyes, holding Eleanor close, and felt at peace. He had started out as a broken man seeking only to escape his pain. He had become a husband, a father, a grandfather. He had become a teacher and a friend. He had become whole again, and he had done it not through violence or dominance or any of the things the world told men they needed to be. He had done it through kindness, through choosing peace, through opening his heart to love again despite the risk. That was his legacy. Not the fights he had won or the confrontations he had dominated, but the love he had shared and the gentleness he had shown. The lives he had touched not with his fists but with his open hands and generous heart. As Pierce drifted off to sleep, his last thought was a simple one. Thank you. Thank you for second chances. Thank you for Eleanor. Thank you for this beautiful, hard, wonderful life. The mountains stood guard around the cabin, silent and eternal. Inside, two people who had found each other against all odds slept peacefully, wrapped in love that had endured for decades and would endure beyond their lifetimes in the family they had created. It was the perfect ending to a story that had started with a gunshot and a challenge, but had been won not through violence, but through the quiet, steady power of kindness and love. Pierce Sullivan, the mountain man with gentle hands and a fierce heart, had shown the world what true strength looked like. And Eleanor Adams, the teacher from Boston who had found her home in the Oklahoma wilderness, had shown that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your heart to love again. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. A legacy of kindness, of choosing peace over violence, of showing that real victory comes not from defeating others but from loving them. And in the morning, they would wake up together, as they had done for over 3 decades, and start another day of their beautiful life. There would be breakfast to make and chores to do and probably grandchildren stopping by for a visit. There would be quiet moments together and laughter, and the comfortable rhythm of 2 lives perfectly intertwined. It was not the life either of them had expected when they started out, but it was exactly the life they both needed. Hard won, deeply felt, and absolutely worth every moment of the journey that had brought them to it. The story of the mountain man who won his lady's heart not with violence but with kindness was not just a story. It was their life, their truth, their greatest triumph. And it would echo through their descendants for generations to come. A reminder that the strongest force in the world is not aggression or dominance, but love freely given and gratefully received.